A tranquil morning in Pine Hollow, Tennessee. 63-year-old black veteran Clarence Mitchell tends his garden, yearning only to savor the day with his beloved wife. But what happens when a federal task force storms their home, tasing his wife before his eyes? 5 words, "I have the lambda file," turn a brutal raid into a panicked retreat. They unveil a horrific secret the powerful want buried forever. From a quiet gardener, Clarence becomes the spark exposing war crimes and human experiments, shaking America to its core. What would you do if the truth you hold could topple the mightiest? Hit subscribe and ring the bell to join veteran best stories in following this man's unyielding journey. From invisibility to a blaze of justice, altering history and inspiring millions. At 63, Leonard Harris no longer needed an alarm clock. His body woke each morning like a biological timepiece, precise to the minute. It was the one thing neither time nor war had taken from him. As the first sunlight filtered through the window curtains, its gentle gold settling on the deep creases of his forehead, Leonard opened his eyes. He turned slowly, careful not to shift the mattress so his wife, Esther, could continue her peaceful sleep. The left knee shot a familiar sting as soon as he sat up. That pain no longer surprised him. It was his customary morning greeting, reminding him of his last deployment in Iraq, strewn with scorching earth and life-or-death decisions etched into memory. Leonard did not complain. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, inhaled deeply, then let his foot touch the floor, searching for the worn fabric slippers he always left in the same spot. Every movement had its place, as though the entire house were a mental map, where everything was positioned just so to counter the chaos that war had once thrown into his life. That order was his lifeline, keeping him afloat amid heavy memories and long, sweat-drenched nights. Leonard walked down the narrow hallway leading to the kitchen, noticing the bedroom door still ajar. He heard Esther shift, then fall silent again. She always rose a bit later than he did, and he maintained the habit of making no sound when preparing coffee. In the small kitchen, Leonard poured coffee into the glass carafe. The thick liquid dripped drop by drop like a familiar melody. The aroma of hot coffee filled the air, a warm greeting. As the carafe's drips settled into a steady rhythm, he turned to look out the back door, where the garden was slowly awakening. Each morning, he dedicated a few minutes to the garden as an indispensable ritual. Opening the old wooden door, he stepped onto the threshold, feeling the cool earth under his feet. The cucumber plants were in season, their yellow blossoms standing out among tender green leaves. Leonard bent down, his fingertips barely brushing the soil, a habit Esther had once advised after a sleepless night haunted by nightmares. "Speak to the soil," she had said. "It knows how to listen." At first, he hesitated. A soldier who had once led a squad, who had lived among sand and gunfire, now talking to dirt? But then he followed her advice, not with words, but with presence. Under a tree's canopy, he began to hum softly. "Wade in the water," his voice deep and somber yet warm, echoing like a gentle wave rolling across time. That melody tied him to a distant past, church gatherings, afternoons sitting on his grandmother's porch, listening to stories of ancestors crossing rivers to claim freedom. The song, paired with the familiar rhythm of gardening tasks, allowed Leonard's hands to move naturally. He checked each plant base, removed withered leaves, and straightened the stakes knocked over by last night's rain. Each time his fingers touched the soil, his mind anchored itself in the present, where there were no gunshots, no helicopter blades, no blood staining the red earth. No one disturbed him during those moments. He felt lightest then, as though all the heavy memories stayed behind closed doors, leaving only him and the garden, a silent yet healing bond. When he reached the back vegetable bed, Leonard noticed a new sprout, a small, fragile shoot, yet resilient. He smiled softly, not because of anything grand, but because life persisted, despite all the harshness the world had thrown at him. A few sparrows chirped on the porch roof. They did not fear him. They had grown used to the sight of a gray-haired man walking with a distinct limp, singing each morning and tending the plants. Leonard rose slowly, straightened his spine, and gazed toward the wooden fence. Beyond lay the main road and the town of Pine Hollow, changed over time. But here, in this small patch of land behind his home, he still found wholeness. Returning to the kitchen, the coffee was ready. He poured a cup for himself and another for Esther, placing it beside the stove as always. Each action whispered, "I am still here. I still remember." On the wooden table stood a vintage photo frame, its glass dulled by age. One photo showed him and Esther on their wedding day. Next to it was another, Leonard in his uniform, standing with his squad in Basra. They were both young then, their eyes bright. Some men in that picture never returned. He laid a hand on the frame, said nothing, just a reverent moment of silence. Soft footsteps emerged from the bedroom. Esther was awake. Leonard turned to the kitchen, smiling at the steaming cup in his hand. Another day began, without glory, without triumph, but whole and full of meaning. Peace did not last long. On the way home from the community center, Esther suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her eyes fixed on a black SUV parked quietly in front of house number 42. She whispered, as if afraid her own breath would disturb the vehicle, "It's there again." Leonard did not need to ask. He had seen it too. 3 days in a row, the same time, the same spot. No one stepped out. No one stepped in. He nodded, his gaze never leaving the windshield of the SUV. "Maybe it's a visitor," he said, reassurance slipping out as quickly as an old reflex. But even he did not believe it. That night, after Esther had gone upstairs, Leonard remained in his small study. He accessed the home's security camera system, his eyes tracking the stored footage. The SUV arrived every day, parked for exactly 47 minutes, neither early nor late. No obvious movement, but that relentless, cold persistence sent a chill through him. It felt as though someone was waiting for him to slip up. Later, Leonard used the excuse of running out of milk to leave the house. He drove slowly through dark streets, his headlights slicing through the thin mist, then stopped at Joe's Diner, one of the few places still lit at this hour. In a back corner, civil rights attorney Malcolm Tate waited. No appointment was needed. Malcolm knew that when Leonard appeared, it meant something urgent was afoot. Without beating around the bush, Malcolm handed Leonard a thick file, pulled from his leather briefcase. "Your name is on a watch list," he said. In the faded print of those pages, Leonard's name appeared next to a cold annotation. "Domestic threat. Monitor closely." Leonard flipped through each page, not shocked, only confirming what he had sensed. "The veterans' lawsuit you're supporting has upset a lot of people," Malcolm explained. "Not because of money, because you demand accountability, and that is more dangerous than any compensation check." Leonard did not reply immediately. His hand clenched the folder, his eyes fixed on the window, where cars passed as though unrelated to the conversation. He knew that from this moment on, the quiet life he had painstakingly built would never be the same. The next morning, a teenager named Jamal Pierce knocked on his door, camera in hand and eyes shining with excitement. He proudly showed Leonard a newly completed interview with a veteran who had served in Fallujah. Leonard watched the clip, his hand gripping a steaming cup of tea. That young man, through genuine listening, had coaxed the old soldier open, revealing deep memories few others could touch. "You know how to listen without pressing," Leonard said when it ended, his voice low and encouraging. But that moment was cut short. A patrol car rolled slowly past the end of the alley, as if scouting. Leonard recognized the driver, Officer Carla Reed. In that instant, her eyes flickered toward him and then looked away, expressionless. At the police station, Carla found an envelope placed on her desk. Inside were photographs of Leonard. At home, in the garden, even when he visited the community center. Each picture bore thick labels. Potential risk. Monitor closely. Carla sat silent before that stack of photos. She knew Leonard. He had once helped her nephew after he was expelled from school. But now, orders from above did not allow her to trust over directives. She tucked the envelope into her drawer, her heart heavy with suspicion and worry. Meanwhile, at home, Esther faced her own shock. She was preparing documents for the non-profit she had built over 5 years, supplying food and medical aid to the poor. When she opened the external hard drive, every file had vanished. The email backup, the cloud storage, the USB, everything was erased. Not a trace remained. The technician she hired confirmed the hardest truth. Someone very skilled did this. It must have been a professional. Esther stood in silence, staring out the window. The backyard garden remained peaceful, but she knew something far greater was quietly encroaching on the safe life they had thought they knew. That night, Leonard tossed and turned. He dreamt, no, relived, memories he had long tried to lock away. In that dream, he ran across a desert. Gunfire boomed like thunder. Smoke curled from burning vehicles. Civilians cried out, trapped between front lines. He saw faces he recognized, and faces whose names he never learned. Deaths unrecorded in any official report. And contractors, not in uniform, issuing orders as though everything were permissible. He bolted upright, sweat soaking his shirt. Esther sat beside him, her hand gently pressed against his chest, offering steady support. "Again with that dream?" she asked, her eyes full of concern. Leonard did not nod or shake his head. He only closed his eyes for a moment, then spoke in a rough, husky voice. "It's not a dream. It never was." For 4 tense days, time dragged like stretched nerves. The black SUV no longer parked brazenly in front of Leonard's house, but he still saw it. Silent, creeping to the end of the street, disappearing and returning at unpredictable intervals. It was no longer obvious, but it had not vanished. The sensation of being watched seeped into every mundane moment, making even watering the plants feel like a calculated act. On Thursday morning, a strange man knocked at the door. He wore a khaki jacket, held a clipboard, and claimed to be a city inspector checking zoning violations. But his name tag hung at an odd angle. The vehicle parked before the house bore no logo, and his black boots were too shiny, as though barely broken in. Leonard peered through the crack of the door. His gaze lingered on the man's collar, an unnatural wrinkle, as if another badge had just been removed. He declined entry, polite but firm. The man forced a smile, scribbled something on his papers, then turned away, leaving no business card, no request to reschedule. As his car rolled off, Leonard knew the threat had crossed a danger threshold. That evening, Leonard checked the security system. Every device still registered green, no malfunctions detected. Yet the data for the past 3 days was completely empty. Every recorded clip had vanished. No access logs, no error messages. Leonard said nothing. He stared at the blacked-out screen for a long moment, then whispered, "It's begun." That night, Esther could not sleep. She sat by the bedroom window, clutching an old Bible but turning no pages. Outside, the air was still, yet weighed down as though a storm loomed. Leonard lay motionless beside her, eyes closed but ears alert. Every sound, from a branch scraping against the window to a distant car's rumble, filtered through the vigilance of a man who had once survived ambushes. At 4:17 a.m., he heard it. Footsteps, steady, light, unnaturally precise. Not a thief, nor local police. This was a professional team. Leonard gently pulled aside the curtain. Under the dim street lamp, dark figures moved along the fence line. Their armor reflected faint light. No voices, only the silent siege. A second later, speakers shattered the night. "Leonard and Esther Harris, come out now! Hands in the air!" The metallic command echoed off the walls. Leonard turned to Esther, took her hand, signaled for silence. They stepped into the hallway. He reached for the door handle. Before he could turn it, 2 explosions thundered through the house. White light tore through the darkness. The sound crashed like thunder in his ear. Esther screamed. She collapsed as smoke and dust billowed like waves. Leonard was disoriented for a moment, then forced himself upright. A heavy blow from behind sent him face first to the floor. A boot pressed into his back, pinning him down as shouts and the pounding of boots surrounded them. Esther, still bewildered, staggered onto the porch. Blood trickled from her left ear, proof that the blast had been too close. When an officer ordered her to lie down, she instinctively moved toward Leonard, unaware of the situation. No second warning came. A taser blast shot from the officer, its twin prongs embedding in her clothing. The 50,000-volt shock jolted through her. Her body writhed, then she fell limp, collapsing onto the concrete with a sickening crack. Leonard roared. The force of his growl seemed to push the officer off him. In an instant, he rolled free from the hold and lunged toward his wife. Everything slowed. Red laser sights flashed in the smoke, a beam trained squarely on his chest. Before the trigger could be pulled, Leonard rose to his full height, unarmed, unflinching. He spoke, clear as though he had awaited this moment his entire life. "I have the Lambda files." The air froze. The commander, standing just behind the front line, raised his hand in a stop signal. "Stand down!" he shouted, then barked into his radio. "Confirm Protocol Lambda. Initiate safety lock. Cease all operations immediately." The officers stepped back. Some looked openly puzzled. The commander continued issuing orders. "Secure the scene. Call for medical aid for the woman. No arrests." Leonard knelt beside Esther, cradling her hand, still trembling from the electric shock. Her eyes flickered open. He whispered, "Stay with me. Don't leave." Across the street, a neighbor's window light switched on. Whispers, a door opening, and then the glow of a phone camera. In the darkness, hiding behind a pickup truck, Jamal crouched with his camera, capturing every image, every second without missing a frame. Under the dim lights of the hospital corridor, Leonard sat motionless, his gaze fixed on the closed door of the emergency room, where Esther was being treated after the savage taser attack. He was not allowed inside. Each passing minute felt like punishment. His arm, still bearing scratches from the raid, hung limp beside his chair. It trembled with each constricted heartbeat. A young nurse, glancing furtively around, approached quietly. She said little. She merely leaned in and whispered, "Room 309. They won't let you in." Her words sparked the anger he had been holding back. Leonard rose, striding quickly down the west hallway. The door to room 309 stood ajar. A pale blue light cast faint shadows over Esther's sleeping face. The taser marks were still visible beneath her hospital gown, red and raw like scorch marks. He sat beside her, tightly clasping her hand. Hands that had belonged to him for decades, now fragile as dry twigs. Leonard bent close to her ear, whispering apologies that could never be enough. A firm knock sounded, decisive, yet not from a guard or nurse. The door opened, and in stepped Vernon Brooks, an old comrade from Iraq, now the hospital's chaplain. Time had silvered his hair, but his eyes remained sharp. They still carried the desert's breath and the echoes of bullets. "Mentioning Lambda is brave, or insane," Vernon murmured, holding an old key whose worn chain and scratched surface spoke of decades past. "Your archive is tied to this key. It's been paid for over 2 decades. Everything you need is in there." Without waiting for a response, Vernon turned and left, vanishing as though he had never been there. The next morning, Leonard returned home, but it was no longer the house that had echoed with him and Esther's laughter. The raid scene had been eerily restored. Brand new windows bore no trace of shattered glass. The walls were freshly painted. The cracks had disappeared. Not a single shard, not a scrap of damage remained. Everything looked repaired, but not with goodwill. They wanted to erase every mark, erase memories, erase the truth. Only the neighbor's wary eyes followed him, a reminder that everyone had seen and still remembered. Inside the bedroom, Leonard knelt and pried up the floorboard in the corner. That spot only he and Esther knew. Beneath the wood lay an old metal box, its corner corroded by time. He unlocked it and retrieved a yellowed USB drive, etched with a small emblem. The word Lambda faintly visible. He held it tightly in his hand, his fingertip tracing each scratch as though feeling the past itself. The barely legible inscription carried undeniable weight. It was evidence. It was a threat. It was the truth they had tried to bury. 3 days later, Esther was discharged. She returned home, moving slowly, her hand still trembling, haunted by flashbacks of losing consciousness. Her eyes held a mixture of fatigue and resolve. But when they stepped into the living room, both froze. A chair stood out of place. The bookshelf showed a strange gap. The corner lamp leaned slightly, as if someone had entered, observed, and then left. Nothing was taken. Nothing was destroyed. Only a cold message remained. "We can return any time." That afternoon, Jamal Pierce, the teenage videographer, knocked at the door. He held his camera, concern etched on his face. "I recorded everything," he said, raising the device. On it, the footage of the raid was clear. The flash of stun grenades, the screams, the moment Leonard was subdued, and the instant he declared, "I have the Lambda files," the statement that made the commander abruptly retreat. "I posted part of it online. The hashtag #LambdaTruth is trending fast. People are talking." Leonard looked at Esther. She nodded slowly. There was no going back, no refuge left. Jamal placed a new USB drive on the table. "Here's a copy. I've also sent copies to other places, both inside the country and abroad. They can't erase everything." His voice was calm beyond his years, though his eyes still held fear. "I believe in you, sir. I believe that truth will protect itself. Leonard accepted the drive, his grip on it firm. The years he had spent trying to bury the truth now surged back. He was no longer just the man who planted trees and brewed morning coffee. He was a witness, living proof. And now, he had allies. Esther looked at her husband, her voice soft as a breath but clear. We begin, right? Leonard nodded, his eyes fixed on the USB drive in his hand. Yes, and this time, they cannot make me remain silent. Leonard sat silently in his chair, the living room light cast onto his face, etched with wrinkles and anxiety. Esther, though her body had not yet recovered, still strove to keep steel in her gaze. We must go public, she said, her voice not loud, but as sharp as a blade cutting through the air. Leonard stared at her for a long moment, as if wishing to escape reality, then shook his head. The Lambda file is insurance. It keeps us alive. It is not yet a weapon. But everything moved faster than he could decide. A message appeared on Leonard's phone. Back fence, 20 minutes. No signature, no identity, only a cold, single line. Leonard checked his gun, motioned for Esther to stay inside, then slipped out the back door, moving along the dark alley. Under the dim yellow glow of a street lamp, a woman waited, wearing a baseball cap, draped in a loose shirt. As Leonard approached, she pulled down her mask. Officer Carla Reed. I'm no longer an officer, she said. The raid order came from Homeland Security, but when I checked, there were no records saved. No case number, no report. Something's wrong. She looked at Leonard, eyes tense. What did you tell them? Leonard answered without hesitation. A secret they thought was buried, but it's not dead. When Leonard returned home, Esther stood in the kitchen, her hand trembling, her face ashen. Someone just photographed my medical records at the clinic, she said. Not an employee. He used his phone to record me answering questions. Leonard clenched his fists. They're watching everything, Esther whispered. That evening, Jamal arrived, not alone. Behind him was a frail, ragged-haired boy with thick glasses, 17-year-old computer prodigy, Caleb Holt. He can decrypt anything, Jamal said. Leonard handed over the old USB, the one etched with Lambda, to Caleb. Caleb plugged it into his laptop. His fingers flew over the keyboard. Within minutes, hundreds of files appeared, encrypted by algorithms dating back to 2004. I found reports of civilian executions, Caleb said, voice trembling. There are even coordinates for a mass grave, and photos. Leonard nodded heavily. The truth about Operation Nightfall, a mission no one dared mention. Caleb continued his work, his expression shifting from curiosity to horror. They experimented on POWs with chemical agents. Some documents were cut from the military record, the rest encrypted here. He paused. But someone planted a listening device in your house. Leonard froze. Caleb pointed to the wall. Under the clock, inside the smoke alarm, even the fuse box has a signal chip. Esther fell silent, her hands shaking. How long have they been listening to us? Leonard sprang to his feet. Pack up. We leave now. Without waiting for objections, he pulled a suitcase from the closet, stuffed in essentials, external drives, a laptop, identification. Esther gathered her medication and medical files, and Jamal packed away his recording gear. Within 10 minutes, they left the house that had once been their sanctuary, now a nest of spies. They reached a wooden cabin deep in the woods, a home once belonging to a late friend of Leonard's. There, Caleb reassembled his setup. He extracted another batch of emails, exchanges between three powerful names: General Curtis Ramsey, Senator Donald Vance, and Ethan Cross, CEO of Horizon Defense. They knew about Operation Nightfall, Caleb said. They approved it. Here's an email from 2003. Eliminate the entire village within the target zone to ensure operational efficiency. And from 2004, monitor closely new drug trials. Prevent any media leaks. Leonard clenched his jaw. They didn't just purge. They turned humans into lab subjects. Esther said nothing. She simply sat down, tears streaming. She grasped Leonard's hand, her frail fingers squeezing hard. You carried this alone too long, she said, voice choked. Leonard said nothing, but his eyes seemed to reply. Now, you share the burden. A sudden noise tore through the silence. A gunshot hit the fence behind the cabin. No one was hurt, but the message was clear. We know where you are. Esther rose, her expression harder than ever. They're escalating, she said. The next morning, Carla Reed appeared. Her coat was dusted with road grime. Her eyes no longer bore the badge of a cop. She placed a thick file on the wooden table. Internal documents from Horizon Defense, grant applications, drug development reports, and the contract between the Department of Defense and Horizon. She exhaled sharply. They orchestrated the raid, no doubt about it. Leonard looked at her. You're no longer a cop? Carla shook her head. I crossed the line, but I can't go back. I'm in this with you, Mr. Harris. We swim together, or we sink together. No one spoke. Yet within the cabin, what filled the air was not fear, but resolve. They had touched a forbidden secret. And now, either they stepped back, or they forced the truth into the light, no matter the cost. Leonard stood silently before 7 men, old comrades who had once endured the fires of Iraq alongside him. Each bore the marks of war, one with a bloodshot, swollen eye, another with a metal arm, each with a gaze forever stripped of innocence. Yet today, they did not reunite to reminisce. Leonard looked at each man in turn, then nodded. We do not fight for superiors. This time, we fight for justice. Their target, a covert facility in Nevada, where Horizon Defense continued inhumane human experiments. Information from the Lambda file, combined with testimonies from survivors, confirmed this to be the epicenter of darkness. To infiltrate, Esther and Carla posed as internal auditors, risking everything to step into the lion's den. Dressed in crisp attire, eyes as cold as steel, they passed through security. A hidden camera beneath Esther's lapel recorded horrifying images in the basement. Windowless holding cells, ominous medical equipment, and the exhausted eyes of prisoners. One man named Miguel trembled as he revealed, "They inject drugs. Many never come back." Night fell, and Leonard led the raid team. Each footstep was measured like a combat score. No gunfire, no alarms. They rescued Miguel and 2 relatives, simultaneously seizing a cache of secret documents. As they retreated, they left behind a single trace: the truth. Jamal received the data and footage. He edited tirelessly for 2 sleepless days. When the video went live, the world shook. The documentary, combining raid footage, Miguel's testimony, and the Lambda file, spread like wildfire. Within 48 hours, it reached 2 million views. The hashtag #LambdaTruth saturated social media. News outlets reported in unison. Horizon found itself on the defensive. Ethan Cross, Horizon's CEO, appeared on television to deny all allegations. But when asked about the list of targets for elimination extracted from the file, he hesitated. That moment of silence was enough for the public to realize the truth could no longer be buried. The next morning, the FBI unexpectedly raided Horizon's headquarters. 37 people were arrested, research labs were sealed, but Cross had vanished, leaving behind a dangerous void. Unyielding, Leonard led a march to the Capitol. In his hand, he held the old flag that had once guided him across the desert. At his side stood Esther, her hand still trembling, her eyes alight with determination. They stood before a sea of people shouting, "Lambda is the truth." The large screen in front replayed Miguel's words. "Thanks to him, my child is alive." Before Congress, Leonard presented the file that Vernon Brooks had left behind, a ledger detailing secret transactions among General Ramsey, Senator Vance, and Ethan Cross. He went through each entry, each amount, each name. No more denials. Ramsey was arrested on the spot. Vance quietly resigned. Cross was indicted in absentia, placed on a global wanted list. A week later, Leonard opened his mailbox to find a simple handwritten letter. "I have a job. My child can go to school. Thank you." Signed, Miguel. Leonard held the letter, remaining silent for a long moment. Esther came beside him, gently grasping his hand. No words needed. The garden behind their house now bloomed in full splendor. What once served as a refuge from war's nightmares had become a symbol of hope. Pine Hollow, a small town that once lay silent, now echoed with the footsteps of justice. The Lambda file was not merely a drive, it was a pledge. That truth, no matter how long buried, would ultimately be named. And Leonard, the soldier of old, now stood no longer alone. Leonard Harris's journey proves the power of truth. It transforms a quiet black veteran into a blaze of justice, igniting hope for millions. From his cucumber garden in Pine Hollow, Tennessee, to Capitol Hill's hearing rooms, he exposed war crimes and human experiments, forcing the powerful to their knees. The Lambda file isn't just a USB. It's a reminder that one person's courage can reshape history. Now, Pine Hollow stands as a symbol of dignity. Esther's garden blooms as their legacy. But the story doesn't end. More secrets await revelation, and we need people like you to keep the flame alive. Dear American viewers, reflect. What will you stand for? Like this video, subscribe if you believe in justice, and comment where you're watching from, what time it is. From every corner of America, let's keep the truth alive together. See you in the next video, where we uncover more stories that stir the heart.